Welcome, and settle yourself into a place where you feel calm and comfortable. If you have a blanket nearby, pull it around you now and let yourself sink into the quiet. Tonight, we are taking a slow journey into the Middle Ages. We will not hurry, and we will not raise our voices. Instead, we will walk softly into the past, step by step, until the world of today feels far away. When people think of medieval battles, they often picture shining knights, heroic duels, and glorious trumpet calls. Movies and games give us that version because it feels exciting and neat. But the truth, as you will soon discover, was very different. In real life, battles were confusing, heavy, muddy, and frightening. The people who fought were not movie heroes. They were ordinary men, often farmers or craftsmen, pulled into war by duty, money, or fear of punishment. Even knights with their bright armor often wish they were anywhere else. Tonight we will imagine what it was really like, slowly and carefully, without rushing, without the noise of excitement. We will look closely at the small details, how soldiers stood, what they smelled, what they saw when they opened their eyes on the battlefield. You will notice how different the truth was from the legends, and how the lives of ordinary people shaped these great events. So close your eyes if you wish. Let the noise of today fade into silence, and imagine yourself stepping back hundreds of years to a time when the battlefield was not a stage of glory, but a place of mud, fear, and survival. And before we begin, if you enjoy this journey through Boring History for Sleep, take a moment to subscribe, leave a gentle comment, and let me know where in the world you are tuning in from tonight. It helps me keep telling these long, quiet stories for you. Let us begin. The first moments of a medieval battle. If you have ever wondered what it was really like to stand on the edge of a medieval battlefield, it helps to set aside the picture that movies and video games give us. Forget the slow-motion sword fights, the glittering armor, the neat rows of disciplined troops charging in unison. The reality was far less polished, far less heroic, and far more human. It was clumsy, confusing, heavy, and sometimes humiliating. Imagine yourself as one of those soldiers, not a knight of legend, not a commander with a shining banner, but an ordinary man pulled from the fields, the workshop, or the village. You are not trained for years. You have a few weeks maybe of practice with a spear. You are wearing clothes that itch, armor that pinches, and boots that never seem to sit quite right. You do not want to be here, but here you are. The morning of battle is long before the first weapon is swung. Hours may pass in preparation, in gathering, in simply standing around waiting for the commanders to decide when to move. You shift from one foot to the other. Your shoulders ache from holding your shield for so long. The air smells damp because battles often took place on farmland or open fields. You hear the bleating of sheep in the distance because peasants did not move their animals just because lords had chosen their land for war. The ground beneath your boots is not smooth. It is uneven, filled with ruts from wagon wheels, soft patches of earth, stones half buried in mud. A battlefield is rarely chosen for comfort. Armies met where paths crossed, where rivers needed defending, where castles blocked a route. You might be standing in a field that only yesterday was used for planting barley or wheat. The furrows still mark the soil. It is not flat, and it is certainly not clean. You stand in formation, shoulder pressed against shoulder. The line of men stretches out to either side, so long that you cannot see the end of it. The sound is constant, clanking of armor, muttered prayers, nervous coughs. Someone nearby whispers to himself again and again, perhaps reciting a psalm or repeating the name of his wife. Another man breathes heavily, each exhale sour with garlic, sweat, and fear. There are no mints in the Middle Ages, and in a crowd of hundreds, the smell is inescapable. Behind you stands the hornblower, the man with perhaps the safest job in the army. His task is to signal commands, but in truth, his notes are often lost in the storm of human noise. Still, he is valuable, and because of that, he does not stand in the front line. he is kept back, protected. Many horn players lived through more battles than any armoured knight, their lungs stronger than their sword arm needed to be. At last the sound comes, thin and wavering, the signal to advance. You hear it faintly, though you cannot be sure if it is meant for your unit or another. Already the noise of men shifting their weight, shields thumping together, and weapons rattling in nervous hands almost drowns it out. You step forward because the man beside you does, and he steps forward because the man beside him does. Movement spreads like a ripple, uncertain, uneven, never as neat as a film might suggest. And then, the moment arrives, the first steps into battle. They are rarely graceful. The front line, pressed by the weight of the men behind, often stumbles. Shields knock together, spears tangle, men bump into one another. A single slip can bring down 3 or 4. Some fall face first into mud before the enemy has even come near. Their helmets strike the earth with a dull thud. Their dignity leaves faster than their balance. They scramble to rise, weighed down by armor, slowed by fear, while comrades trip over them. The carefully drawn line becomes a wave of stumbling bodies. The ground, soft and slick from rain, gives no mercy. Boots sink ankle deep. Stones turn underfoot, twisting ankles. Roots catch toes and send soldiers sprawling. In the confusion, it is sometimes the earth itself, not the enemy, that strikes the first blow. And so the battle begins not with triumph, but with clumsiness. The songs written afterward forget this part. No poet sings of the man who slipped on wet grass and landed on his face before he ever raised his sword. No tale is told of the soldier whose first injury was a sprained ankle from stepping in a rabbit hole. Yet these things happened again and again, because war is not a performance. It is a messy business carried out on messy ground. You feel it in your own body. Your knees shake, whether from fear or from the strain of standing still. So long you cannot say. Your shield digs into your arm, already sore. You grip your spear too tightly, your fingers stiff, your knuckles pale. You breathe quickly, but the air is heavy with the heat of so many men pressed together. The horn calls again, but you barely hear it over the rising shouts. Shouting, in fact, becomes its own kind of weapon. Men yell not only to frighten the enemy, but also to steady themselves. The cries that echo across the field are less about courage and more about survival. Some are high-pitched and panicked. Others are deep and guttural, sounds pulled from the stomach without thought. Few are words of glory. More often they are wordless cries, like the sounds someone makes when lifting something too heavy, or when struck by sudden pain. The noise grows. Armor rattles. Weapons clank. Hundreds of voices rise together, not in song, but in a storm of human sound. The neat rhythm of commands is lost. What reaches your ears is confusion. As you push forward, you stumble once, catch yourself, stumble again. The line wavers but holds. You hear the grunt of the man beside you as he nearly falls, saved only by pressing his weight into you. You shove him back upright, not out of kindness, but because if he falls, you might be dragged down too, and all the while, the enemy draws nearer. You catch sight of them between helmets and shields. They look much like you, nervous, sweaty, already, stumbling. Their line is no more perfect than yours. They too trip, too slip, too struggle with mud and fear. For all the talk of glory and honor, what you see is a mirror of your own discomfort. Ordinary men, pushed into extraordinary danger, wishing they were anywhere else. The clash is not yet here, but already you understand something. The battlefield is not a place of shining triumph. It is a place where the earth itself seems to fight against you. It is a place where the first battle is not against the enemy, but against the mud, the stones, and your own trembling body. And so, as you take those first steps into the fight, shield heavy, knees weak, boots slipping, you realize how far this reality is from the polished tales. The stories told by poets and chroniclers polish the dirt away, but you, Standing in the press of men, smelling the sweat, hearing the uncertain horn, and stumbling through the uneven ground, know that the truth is far more ordinary and far less glorious. The battle has only just begun, but already you feel the weight of it pressing down. And this, more than any sword or axe, is the first lesson of medieval war. It was not neat, it was not noble, and it rarely began with courage. It began with clumsiness, confusion, and the constant fear of falling before a single blow was struck. The shuffle into battle. If you were expecting to rush into battle like a brave knight from a storybook, charging forward with a mighty roar and swinging a shining sword, you would be deeply disappointed. The truth is much slower, much less dramatic, and far more uncomfortable. You do not rush, you shuffle. Imagine yourself standing in that dense crowd of men, pressed so close that you can barely move your arms. The air is hot with the heat of so many bodies gathered together. The sound of your own heartbeat seems louder than the horn signal. You want to take a deep breath, but the smell around you makes it unpleasant. Sweat, garlic, damp wool, and nervous fear all mix into one thick cloud. You breathe it in because you must, but each inhale makes you wish the wind would shift. The man beside you breathes heavily. His chest rises and falls in quick, nervous bursts. His breath spills over you, hot and sour. Medieval soldiers did not brush their teeth with minty paste in the mornings. They did not carry chewing gum in their pockets. If you are lucky, the man next to you ate bread and cheese. If you are unlucky, he ate raw onions or garlic, and the smell clings to his every exhale. You shuffle forward, one small step at a time, because that is all the space you have. Hundreds of men, shoulder to shoulder, cannot sprint together. If even one man tripped, many others would fall with him. So instead of rushing like a wave, you creep forward like a heavy wall, inch by inch, shield pressed against shield. Your knees tremble, partly from the weight of your armor, partly from fear. You try to tell yourself it is only the strain of standing so long, but deep down, you know better. Fear runs through every man here, no matter how brave he pretends to be. Your mouth is dry, though your palms sweat. The leather of your weapon's handle feels slick beneath your fingers. You adjust your grip, again and again, but it never feels quite right. Voices rise around you. Shouts, chants, prayers, curses. Soldiers yell loudly, their cries blending into a great roar. Some call out for glory, but most sounds are raw and unshaped. They are the noises people make when they lift something too heavy, or when they strike something with all their might. Later, survivors would often say they did not remember shouting at all, yet witnesses swore they cried out. The sounds slipped from them without thought, as natural as breathing. In fact, shouting was less about communication and more about survival. The noise steadied nerves. It gave the body something to do with its fear. And in the press of battle, where you could hardly hear the horn or the commander's orders, shouting was the only language left. You hear someone beside you yell a word that sounds like charge, though you doubt he means it. Another man cries out in something closer, to a sob. To your own surprise, a sound escapes your lips too. Something between a growl and a moan. A sound you would be embarrassed to admit making if you ever remembered it later. The line moves forward again. Your boots drag through the mud. Each step feels heavier than the last. Then the first strike comes, not from the enemy, not yet, but from within your own ranks. The man in front of you halts suddenly, and you stumble into him. Your shield crashes into his back. He staggers forward and collides with the soldier ahead of him. A ripple of bumps and jolts runs down the line. It feels almost like being part of a clumsy dance where no one knows the steps. And then, the real clash begins. You do not see a knight galloping forward, his sword gleaming. What you feel is a sudden impact against your shield as the enemy line collides with yours. The sound is enormous, a crashing wave of wood, metal, and bone. Your ears ring, and you cannot tell whether the pain in your head comes from the enemy's strike or from the comrade who slammed his helmet into you by accident. Your vision blurs for a moment. Shapes press close. A spear jabs forward, not at you, but near you, and the shock runs through the men around you. You shove back with your shield, your arm shaking from the effort. The enemy shoves too. You are caught in the middle of a great pushing match, a wall of men against another wall of men. It is not elegant. It is not noble. It is a crush of bodies, each one desperate not to fall. Your weapon, held so carefully, suddenly feels clumsy. There is no space to swing it properly. Your movements are short, awkward jabs, half blocked by your own comrades. You cannot aim well. You cannot see clearly. The man in front of you blocks half your view, and the slit in your helmet narrows it even further. You thrust forward anyway, more from instinct than skill. Your ears still ring. The shouting continues. Voices rise all around you, but the words are lost. What you hear instead is a storm of sound, grunts, crashes, cries, thuds. The rhythm of your own breathing grows ragged. Sweat drips down your face, soaking into the padding beneath your helmet. The padding that once felt protective now feels suffocating, like being wrapped too tightly in blankets under the hot sun. The enemy presses harder. You press back. Your shield arm aches, but you do not dare lower it. Each second feels like an hour, and still, the line shuffles. No one sprints, no one leaps. It is always a slow, grinding push, as if two enormous doors are being forced against each other, creaking, straining, threatening to burst. You move forward by inches, if at all. The clash is less a dance and more a wrestle, a constant struggle of weight and will. And all around, men make noise without knowing it. Groans, gasps, yells, prayers. You hear one soldier cry out for his mother. Another calls for God. Another curses loudly, not at the enemy, but at his own stumbling feet. The battlefield is full of these sounds, small pieces of fear breaking free from human throats. Movies rarely show this. They prefer the clean clash of steel, the neat one-on-one duels. But in truth, the opening of battle was closer to a crowded street fight, except that everyone carried sharp or heavy weapons, and no one had enough room to use them properly. For you standing in that press, time bends strangely. The minutes stretch long. You wonder how long you have been fighting, though in truth it has only been moments. Your arms already feel heavy. Your throat is dry, and yet the line still pushes, still shuffles, still surges back and forth like a living wall. This is the reality of the first clash. Not glory, not heroism, but the suffocating closeness of men packed too tightly together, breathing garlic and sweat, shoving, stumbling and shouting, not for honor, but for survival. And so you shuffle forward, shield pressed, weapon clumsy, knees trembling. You realize, in these first minutes, that battle is not what the songs promised. It is not a charge, it is a shuffle. And if you survive the shuffle, perhaps you will live to see what comes next. The noise that consumed the battlefield. If you try to imagine the sound of a medieval battle, your mind may turn first to movie soundtracks. You might picture triumphant horns, deep drums, or orchestral scores swelling as knights charge into the fray. In truth, none of that existed. The real soundscape of a battle was not music but chaos. It was not a clear melody, but a crushing, overwhelming wall of noise, layered with thousands of human voices, clashing weapons, and the groans of the wounded. The first thing you notice is how loud it is, louder than you thought possible. You expected shouts, perhaps the crash of weapons, but this is different. It is a sound that fills your ears until you cannot hear your own thoughts. It is a storm of noise, where every individual cry mixes into something larger, something almost inhuman. Imagine yourself there. Your shield shakes violently as something strikes against it. The sound is not clean, not like the sharp ringing you might expect from a sword. Instead, it is a dull, jarring crash, metal against wood. The blow rattles your entire arm, numbing your fingers. You hear your own grunt of surprise, though it is swallowed instantly by the greater roar around you. Then comes another sound. A scream. Not a word, not a sentence, but a raw, cutting cry that pierces through for a moment before fading back into the wall of sound. You do not know if it is friend or foe. You cannot tell where it came from. All you know is that it rises, sharp and desperate, before being lost again in the tide of noise. The clash continues. Swords slam against shields. Spears thrust against armor. The noises blend together into a constant rhythm of thuds and crashes. You realize that every strike creates more than one sound. The metal hitting, the wood splintering, the breath forced from the lungs of the man struck, the grunt of the one delivering the blow. Each moment is not a single sound, but a chorus of them. And still voices rise. Soldiers shout to steady their nerves, to frighten the enemy, or simply because they cannot hold the noise inside any longer. Some chant the names of saints. Others cry out oaths. Many just yell wordlessly, their voices cracked and rough. It is not organized, not beautiful. It is desperate, and it is endless. Soon the noise becomes so overwhelming that your mind begins to filter it. You no longer hear individual shouts. You no longer notice each clang of metal. Instead, you hear it as one single thing, a crushing roar, like the sea pounding against rocks during a storm. The sound presses against you as much. As the enemy does, your shield arm trembles. Each strike against it is another crash in your ears. Your body absorbs the sound as much as your ears do. The vibrations run down your arm, through your chest. Your bones seem to hum with the endless impacts. You shake your hand to try to ease the numbness, but there is no relief. Another strike comes, and another, each one blurring into the last. Your breathing grows ragged. The padding beneath your armor clings to your skin, soaked with sweat. It is heavy, suffocating, more like a furnace than protection. You feel the heat rise with every passing minute. The sun presses down from above, turning your helmet into a cooking pot. You shift, desperate for air, but the noise reminds you there is no escape. And then you realize something else. The sound is not only outside of you, it is inside you as well. Your own breathing, harsh and uneven, fills your ears. Your heartbeat drums in your chest, loud enough that you almost mistake it for the drum of weapons. The world becomes layers of noise, your body, your comrades, your enemies, all mixing into one overwhelming storm. This is the true sound of medieval battle. It is not neat, it is not musical, it is suffocating. You try to focus, to find some sense in the chaos, but the noise makes thought difficult. Every attempt at reasoning is interrupted by a crash or a cry. You lift your shield, block another strike, and lose your train of thought. You thrust your weapon forward, hear a grunt, and wonder if you struck friend or foe. The sound gives you no answers. The ground beneath you adds its own voice. Boots slam into mud, splashing water and sucking at the earth. Men stumble, and the dull thump of falling bodies adds to the rhythm. Somewhere nearby, someone vomits from fear or exhaustion, and even that sound is swallowed into the whole. The battlefield is not only a place of weapons, it is a place of bodies, and bodies make many sounds when pressed to their limits. Minutes pass, though they feel like hours. The noise does not lessen. If anything, it grows as panic rises and desperation sets in. Men who were silent at the start now shout, their voices roar. Some sing, tuneless and cracked, clinging to whatever rhythm they can find. Others groan as they push against the enemy line, each effort pulled from lungs already burning with fatigue. Your ears ring constantly. Sometimes you hear a sharp ringing tone, high and piercing, that drowns out even the shouts. It is the sound of your own ears trying to protect themselves. Though you do not know that, all you know is that the world seems muffled for a moment before another clash slams back into focus. And yet, for all its terror, there is something strangely dull about the noise. After a while, your mind begins to drift. The sounds blur into one endless wave, and in that blur, you find a strange kind of rhythm. It is overwhelming, but also numbing. Your thoughts wander, even as your body continues to act. This, too, is part of battle, the way the mind drifts away from the unbearable, seeking some corner of quiet, even while the storm rages on. Some survivors wrote later that they remembered nothing of the noise. Their minds had blocked it out, leaving only silence in their memories. Others said the noise never left them, that even years later they would wake at night, hearing the crash of metal, the cries of men, the endless roar. For you, in this moment, it is all-consuming. You cannot escape it. You cannot control it. You can only endure it. And so the battle goes on, not with clean duels or heroic speeches, but with the unrelenting noise of men locked in desperate struggle. It is this noise, more than anything else, that breaks you down. Not the enemy's sword, not the weight of your armor, but the endless, overwhelming sound of chaos pressing into your ears, into your chest, into your very bones. This is the battlefield as it truly was. A place where silence was impossible, where sound itself became a weapon, and where survival meant not only standing against the enemy, but also enduring the deafening storm that surrounded you. What your eyes would see on the battlefield. Close your eyes for a moment, and imagine yourself standing in the middle of a medieval battlefield. Now open them again and ask, what do you actually see? You might expect something like a painting, a grand and noble clash between neat ranks of knights, banners flying high, sunlight glinting on shining armor. That is the picture often painted by artists centuries later, when the danger was gone and the memory could be made beautiful. But the real sight before you is not beautiful. It is confusing, ugly, and hard to process. The first thing you notice is how close everything is. You imagine space, as if you would have room to swing your sword like a hero in a story. Instead, you are packed shoulder to shoulder with men. Their armor presses against you. Their elbows jab into your sides. You see the backs of helmets, the shifting of shoulders, the constant, twitching movements of men who are frightened and straining. There is no open field for you here, only a wall of bodies. The second thing is how dim the world seems, even under a bright sky. Your helmet narrows your vision. The slit in front of your eyes is small, designed to protect more than to show. The edges of your sight are cut away, leaving you with a tunnel view of the chaos. You turn your head, trying to find space to look, but each movement is limited by the weight of your armor and the closeness of the men around you. Through that slit, you see fragments, a flash of sunlight off a sword, the pale shape of a face, eyes wide with fear, mouth open in a shout you cannot hear clearly, the dull gleam of a dented helmet, smeared with mud. Fragments only, never the whole picture. The battlefield is not a clear painting. It is a collection of broken images, none of which make full sense. You lower your eyes for a moment, only to see the ground, and the ground itself is a horror. It is no longer grass or soil. It has become a churning mix of mud, blood, and trampled earth. Boots stomp into it, churn it, splash it. You see a man slip, his foot sucked into the muck, his body falling heavily into the mess. He struggles to rise, but others step over him, pressing him deeper, his armor vanishing into the mud. Blood is everywhere, but not in the neat red streaks you may imagine from paintings. It comes in smears, in spatters, in dark stains across cloth and leather. Some is bright, freshly spilled. Some is darker, already drying into brown crusts. On your own hand, you notice a smear of it, though you do not know whether it is yours or another's. Bodies too begin to appear. At first, you see only movement, but then you catch a glimpse of someone lying still, twisted at an odd angle, eyes staring. You try not to look, but your eyes are drawn back. Each time the press of bodies shifts, you see another shape on the ground, some groaning, some silent. There is no time to mourn, no time to even think. You step past them, or over them, because you have no choice. Above, banners wave, though even they are not as clear as you might think. Dust rises from the ground, mixed with the smoke of torches or the haze of hot air, and the bright colours blur into dull patches. You strain your eyes to find them, to orient yourself, but they sway and vanish behind the press of men. Once more, you are reminded, you cannot see the whole battle. You can only see the few feet around you. The faces you do see are not heroic. They are twisted, grimacing, streaked with sweat and dirt. Eyes bulge wide, not with bravery, but with fear. Beards drip with sweat, mouths gape open for breath, teeth grit in desperate effort. Some faces are strangely blank, the emptiness of men too tired or too shocked to express anything. Others are wild, almost animal, lips curled back, spittle flying as they shout. These are the faces of men in survival, not knights in shining. Romance. Your vision is filled constantly with motion. A sword flashes, then is gone. A shield shoves against you, pushing you sideways. You blink as dust stings your eyes, wiping with a gauntlet that leaves only a smear of grime across your face. Every attempt to focus on something slips away as another movement pulls your attention. Colours, too, are strange. You imagine shining silver armour and bright banners, but the reality is earth tones. Mud brown, sweat dark cloth, dull metal scratched and dented, leather stained darker from constant use. Even the noble knight beside you, once polished and clean, is now mottled with dirt, his armour dulled by dust and impact. The only sharp colour is red, blood on tunics, blood on ground, blood on weapons. That red catches your eye more than anything else. At times, you cannot even see the enemy clearly. You thrust your weapon forward into a wall of bodies, but whether you strike a man or a shield you cannot always tell. Sometimes you meet eyes across the narrow gap, a pair of frightened, furious eyes staring back at you before vanishing behind a helmet. Other times, you see nothing but the flash of steel or the flat face of a shield. The enemy is not a clear figure. He is part of the wall pressing against you, as nameless and shapeless as the noise. And then there are the smaller details. A broken spear lies on the ground, half buried in mud. A torn shoe dangles from someone's foot, the leather ripped apart by the strain. A feather from a fallen helmet plume sticks in the muck, trodden again and again, until it is unrecognizable. The battlefield is full of such fragments, each one telling its own story if only you had time to notice. But there is no time. Each time your eyes catch on something, another movement forces you onward. You cannot stop. You cannot look closely. You see everything and nothing at once, your mind struggling to piece together the fragments. The smoke thickens. Someone near you carries a torch, or perhaps a weapon caught fire. The haze stings your eyes, making them water. You blink, but tears only smear the dirt across your cheeks. Vision becomes blurrier still. You cough, your throat raw, and the world swims before your eyes. It is here you realize the true terror of sight on the battlefield. Not that it is horrifying, but that it is unclear. You do not see clearly. You do not understand fully. You see fragments, confusion, blur, dust, smoke, sweat, and blood. Your mind tries to make sense of it, but sense is impossible. Later, when survivors told their stories, many admitted they remembered little of what they saw. Some described only flashes, an enemy's face, a friend falling, the gleam of a weapon. The mind, overwhelmed, could not keep it all. It chose fragments, leaving the rest in shadow. And perhaps that is mercy, because to see everything clearly would be unbearable. So this is what your eyes find on a medieval battlefield. Not the neat lines of paintings, not the clear stages of movies, but fragments. Mud, blood, dust, sweat, fear. A world of confusion, pressed close around you, impossible to escape, impossible to fully understand. And you realize again that you would not last a day here. What you would smell and taste on the battlefield, if sight on the battlefield gave you fragments, and sound overwhelmed you with noise, then smell would be the sense that most deeply sank into your memory. In truth, you could not escape it. Unlike sight and hearing, which were confused and shifting, smell was steady. It lingered. It coated the air. It forced itself upon you with every breath you took. The first thing you smell is sweat. Imagine thousands of men packed tightly together, all of them in heavy armor or padded clothing, all of them straining, panting, and afraid. Their bodies pour sweat, soaking their tunics, dripping inside their helmets, running down their backs. That sweat has a sharp, salty smell, thick in the air. You breathe it in, and it feels like inhaling heat and fear together. But sweat alone does not dominate. Soon you smell iron. Not the clean iron of a forge, but the iron of blood. Fresh blood has a bright metallic tang. It is sharp, almost bitter, filling your nose and coating the back of your throat. Each cut, each wound adds to the growing cloud of that iron tang, until it feels like the very air is laced with it. You swallow, but the taste lingers on your tongue even though you did not drink it. Then comes mud. The earth, churned by thousands of boots and hooves, mixed with water, blood, and waste, gives off a thick, earthy stench. It is not the clean smell of soil after rain. It is heavier, fouler, like wet leather left too long in a ditch. When men fall into it, their bodies stir the muck, releasing new waves of rot and dampness. Smoke often joins the mixture. Fires are common in medieval battles. Burning arrows, torches, sometimes even flaming pitch. The smoke rises, drifting over the field, carrying with it a choking, bitter smell. It stings your nostrils, makes your eyes water, and turns each breath into a scratch in your throat. Some men cough until they double over, their lungs unable to keep up with the thickness of the air. And behind all of these, other subtler smells creep in. Leather, heated by the sun, gives off a dry animal scent. Horses add their own rank odor, a mix of sweat, manure, and fear. The wood of broken spears splinters and smells of resin, though faint compared to the rest. At times you catch the sour tang of vomit as men retch from fear or from the overwhelming stench. But perhaps the worst is death. The smell of the newly dead is not yet rot, but it is unmistakable. There is a sweetness to it, cloying and heavy, that turns the stomach. Wounded men groan at your feet, their wounds open to the air, and with each passing moment, their smell deepens. As the battle stretches on, more bodies fall, and the air thickens with that sickly sweetness. It settles over you like a cloak, impossible to throw off. Your mouth cannot escape these smells. Every breath brings them in, coating your tongue. Sweat and smoke and blood mingle until you taste them as much as smell them. The metallic tang of iron sits heavily at the back of your throat. You lick your lips, but they are dry, crusted with salt from your own sweat. Sometimes you even bite down and taste the leather of your strap, or the wood of your weapon, gritty with dirt. Water, if you have any, does not help much. It tastes of the leather flask, sometimes already stale, and it never washes away the iron, taste that clings stubbornly. Many soldiers later said they could taste blood in their mouths long after battle ended, even if they themselves had not been wounded. The air itself seemed to feed it to them. If you are unlucky, dirt finds its way into your mouth. A shove knocks you down, your face slams into the mud, and you choke as gritty soil fills your teeth. It tastes bitter, foul, mixed with sweat and blood. You spit, but more dust and smoke rush in. The battlefield does not let you breathe clean. And all the while, your stomach twists. The mix of smells, sweat, iron, mud, smoke, rot, creates a nausea that never leaves. Some men vomit, and the acid smell adds another layer to the already unbearable air. You swallow hard, trying to steady yourself, but each new breath only churns your stomach further. The wind does not save you. If it blows, it only carries the stench from one part of the field to another. The stronger the wind, the more smoke and dust it whips into your face. If it dies, the air grows heavy, stifling, as though the world itself is holding its breath. Either way, you are trapped. Horses add their own contribution. Their manure, trodden underfoot, mixes with the mud until it becomes part of the ground. itself. Their sweat and panic leave a musky, sour smell that clings to your nose. When one falls, its bowels may release, filling the air with a sudden burst of foulness. There is no space to turn away. You breathe it in whether you wish to or not. After hours, the smells dull your senses, not because they grow weaker, but because you grow too tired to fight them. They become the background, the air you live in. Your mind numbs itself to survive. But still, deep inside, your stomach continues to churn, and your throat continues to taste of iron and ash. At night, if the battle ends and you stagger back to camp, the smells follow you. Your clothes are soaked with sweat and blood. Your armor reeks of leather and grime. Your own body smells like fear and effort. Even when you lie down, the iron taste lingers in your mouth, stubborn and bitter. Sleep does not wash it away. And in truth, some smells never leave. Men who fought in battles years earlier sometimes claimed that the scent of blood could return to them in dreams, sudden and sharp. They said a whiff of smoke or wet earth could bring it all back in an instant. That is how deeply those smells carve themselves into memory. So if you ever imagine yourself on a medieval battlefield, remember this. You would not only see and hear, you would smell, you would taste, you would choke on the very air. It would fill your lungs, coat your tongue, sit in your stomach like a sickness. And even when the fighting was done, the stench of battle would cling to you, inside and out. This is why soldiers prayed, not just for victory, but for survival. Because even if you lived, the battlefield left its mark in every breath you took. And this is why, once more, you would not last a day in a medieval battle. The sense of touch, pain, weight, and exhaustion on the battlefield. We have seen the battlefield through the eyes, heard it through the ears, and even smelled and tasted its foulness. But there is another sense that presses itself onto every soldier, and it never lets go. The sense of touch. Touch is what makes battle real. You can close your eyes, you can even plug your ears, but you cannot stop your skin from feeling. Every inch of you is pressed, bruised, scraped, or weighed down. There is no moment of comfort. The first thing you feel is the weight of your armor. Before the battle even begins, your body knows this burden. If you wear chainmail, each ring of iron adds to the mass that drapes across your shoulders. It pulls down on your chest, sags on your hips, digs into your collarbones. With every step, the links shift and pinch, rubbing against your padded underclothes until your skin is raw. If you wear plate armor, it is heavier still, like carrying a second body strapped to your own. The steel plates do not bend easily, and every movement feels restricted, as if you are swimming through water made of metal. Your helmet alone is its own torment. It clamps around your head, muffling sound, trapping heat, and pressing against your skull. The strap under your chin rubs your skin raw, and the padding inside becomes soaked with sweat until it squelches with every movement. Some helmets allow only a narrow slit for vision, which forces you to turn your entire head just to glance sideways. If you fall, the helmet rattles painfully, sometimes striking your nose or jaw with its own weight. Then there is your weapon. It is not a feather in your hand, but a tool of wood and iron, heavy and awkward. A sword, no matter how well made, grows heavier after hours of swinging. A spear drags on your arms, its shaft long and clumsy in a tight crowd. An axe pulls your shoulders with every strike, demanding strength you do not always have. Even your shield, meant to protect you, becomes a punishing weight. Leather straps cut into your forearm, your wrist aches from holding it steady, and each impact sends a shock through your bones. And this is before the enemy even touches you. When the press of battle begins, touch becomes relentless. Bodies slam into you from every side. Elbows jab your ribs. Shoulders crush against your chest. Someone behind you stumbles, shoving you forward, and you stumble into the man in front of you. There is no space to stand freely. You are pressed in a human wall, each man leaning, pushing, straining. It feels like being caught in a tide that never stops. The ground beneath your feet is no comfort either. At first it is only grass or dirt, but soon it turns to churned mud, slippery and uneven. You stumble over dropped weapons, broken shields, and fallen men. Sometimes, your foot lands on something soft, and only later do you realize it was a body. You sink ankle deep in the muck, and each step demands effort to pull free. If you fall, the weight of men and mud presses you down, and it is terrifyingly hard to rise again. Then comes the clash of weapons. Each blow you block sends a shockwave through your arm. The vibration rattles your bones, numbs your fingers, and makes your joints ache. A sword scraping your shield creates sparks and heat against your skin. An axe hitting your helmet makes your skull ring like a bell, your head swimming from the impact. Even if the armor holds, your body feels every strike. Bruises bloom under your clothes. Muscles tear. Bones sometimes crack. And when a weapon does, not just strike, but cuts, the pain is sharp, sudden, and overwhelming. The edge of a sword slicing your arm is a burning line, so hot it feels cold at first, then throbs with fire. An arrow piercing your flesh drives deep, leaving a dull, relentless ache that radiates with every movement. A mace crushing against you is worse, because the pain is not sharp but heavy, like your whole body is breaking from the inside. Sweat drips constantly down your skin, stinging your eyes, running into your wounds. Your hands blister from gripping your weapon, skin peeling away until blood slicks the hilt. Your feet ache from hours of standing, shifting, shoving, and slipping. The padding under your armor grows wet and heavy, clinging to your skin, chafing with every motion. Each breath is a struggle, your chest tight under the weight of steel and the crush of bodies. Even when you are not struck, your body is in agony. Muscles scream from the effort of lifting, swinging, blocking. Your back aches from the weight pressing down. Your legs tremble from holding you upright. At times, you feel your strength fading, but the press of battle allows no rest. If you lower your arms, you are vulnerable. If you stumble, you may not rise again. So you fight against your own exhaustion, forcing your body to keep moving when it wants only to collapse. There are smaller pains too. Smaller pains. Dust scratches your skin. Splinters from broken shafts stab your hands. The leather straps of your armor dig grooves into your flesh. Your teeth rattle from each jolt. Your lips crack from dryness. Even your eyes ache, straining to see through. Sweat, blood, and dust. And then there is the deepest fear. The touch of another man's hand as he grabs you, drags you down, or shoves a blade close. The press of fingers around your throat. The crushing grip on your arm. The sudden weight of a body slamming you into the mud. These are not just painful. They are terrifying. Reminders that you are fragile in this chaos. If you are wounded and fall, the touch does not end. Mud closes around you, sucking at your limbs. Boots trample you, ribs cracking under the weight. Someone's shield may slam into your back as he stumbles over you. Even lying still, you are not free of pressure, not free of touch. The world keeps pressing down until it feels like the earth itself wants to crush you. After the battle, your body tells the story. Bruises cover your arms and legs, purple and swollen. Cuts sting with every movement. Your shoulders ache from the weight of armor, your hands blistered and raw. Even if you survived without a wound, you feel broken, as though you have been hammered all over, and still, touch lingers. For days after, you feel the phantom weight of your helmet, the ache in your wrist from holding the shield, the sting of straps on your skin. Sometimes you wake at night, your body jerking as though struck again, the memory of pain still alive in your muscles. Touch is what makes battle unforgettable. It is the constant reminder that you are not just watching or listening, but suffering. It is your own body telling you that this place is not safe, that every moment is strain, pain, or exhaustion. And so once more, if you imagine yourself in a medieval battle, you must ask, could you endure the endless press of armor, the slam of weapons, the ache of exhaustion, the sharpness of wounds? Could you stand when your body begs you to fall? Could you survive when every inch of your skin is screaming? The truth is simple. you would not last a day. The mind at war, fear, panic, and the crushing weight of courage. So far we have walked through the sights, the sounds, the smells, the tastes, and the touches of a medieval battlefield. Each one assaults the body, yet perhaps the greatest torment comes not from the outside, but from within. The human mind, trapped in such chaos, becomes its own battlefield. Fear, panic, and dread are constant companions, and unlike a sword stroke, which may cut once and end, fear gnaws at you from the first moment you rise in the morning until the final moment the battle ends. Let us imagine the morning before the fight. You stand among your fellows, tightening straps, adjusting weapons, and trying to steady your hands. Already, fear whispers, "What if you fall? What if today is your last sunrise?" You glance around, and you see the same question flickering in the eyes of others, though most hide it with jokes or muttered prayers. Courage, in truth, is often only fear wrapped in silence. Your body betrays you. Your stomach churns, refusing food. Your mouth goes dry though you have drunk water. Your hands tremble as you fasten your belt. Your heart beats faster than you can control, thudding in your chest like a drum that grows louder as the hour of battle draws near. Fear is not only an idea, it is physical. It makes you sweat in the cold air, makes your knees weak before you even march. As the enemy comes into sight, fear sharpens. The line of men across the field seems endless. Their banners wave, their armor glints. You see not men, but a storm, an unstoppable wave. Your mind races. Will they be stronger, faster, more skilled? Will they trample us like grass? Your thoughts shift wildly between desperate confidence and despair. You tell yourself you will be brave, yet doubt gnaws at every word. When the fighting begins, fear does not vanish. It grows more complex. At first, it is terror of death, plain and sharp. But once you are in the press of men, the fear splinters. You fear the unseen arrow, the sword you cannot block, the spear that may slip past your shield. You fear being trapped underfoot, crushed by friend and foe alike. You fear the fire in your lungs as exhaustion builds, knowing weakness is as deadly as a blade. You fear shame too. In medieval society, courage was honor and cowardice was disgrace. If you ran, if you dropped your weapon, if you begged for mercy, your name might live in infamy, or worse, your family might suffer disgrace. So fear of shame often held men in place, as tightly as fear of death drove them away. Imagine that double. Wait. One voice in your mind screams to flee, another commands you to stand. Each step, each decision, is a tug of war between survival and pride. In the thick of combat, fear changes again. It becomes confusion. You do not know what is happening. Beyond the few feet in front of you, the roar of men, the clash of weapons, the dust and smoke, all blur your senses. Panic threatens. What if your side is losing? What if the men behind you are already gone? At any moment, your mind may shatter under too much uncertainty, and panic may overtake reason. Panic spreads faster than fire. If one man breaks and runs, others follow. Armies have collapsed not from wounds but from minds unraveling. Yet fear is not always weakness. Sometimes it sharpens you. It makes your eyes dart quicker, your hands move faster. It keeps you alive by refusing to let you relax. Fear can be both poison and fuel. The same man who trembles at dawn may fight with ferocity by noon, driven by the terror of losing his life. But this edge comes at a cost. To live in such a state is exhausting. Your body burns with borrowed strength, but when that fire dies, you collapse into emptiness. There is also a deeper fear, harder to name. It is not the strike of a blade, nor the shame of flight. It is the fear of helplessness. The fear of being lost in a chaos too vast to control. In battle, you are not master of your fate. The strongest man may fall to an unseen arrow, the bravest. Night may slip in the mud. This helplessness eats at the mind. You realize that no matter your skill or courage, chance rules all. and the mind, craving control, quails before that truth. Fear does not end when the battle ends. For those who survive, it follows like a shadow. Many men carried wounds in their thoughts, as deep as any cut in their flesh. Nightmares woke them. Sudden noises made them leap. The memory of screams and death haunted them in quiet moments. Though they had no word for it, what we now call trauma lived with them. A man might return home with all his limbs yet feel broken in ways unseen. Even religion, which gave comfort, could not erase fear entirely. Yes, many prayed for God's protection, or believed death in battle brought glory. Yet when the sword swung close, even the most devout felt terror. Faith might help you face the field, but it did not silence the instinct of survival. Deep down, every man feared the moment when breath might leave his body forever. Let us consider also the fear felt by those not fighting, the camp followers, the women and children hiding behind walls, the peasants watching armies march through their lands. They too lived with fear, the fear of fire, pillage, or sudden slaughter. Fear was not only for the soldier, it spread across entire communities. War is a net of dread that catches everyone in its threads. And still, men fought. Still, they marched into battle again and again. How? The answer lies not in the absence of fear, but in its mastery. To survive, you did not banish fear, but learned to carry it. You turned it into anger, into duty, into stubbornness. Some dulled it with drink, some with prayer, some with songs shouted on the march. Each found a way to quiet the storm inside, long enough to lift a weapon. Yet imagine yourself there. Imagine your mind caught between terror and duty, between the urge to flee and the demand to stand. Imagine your heart pounding, your thoughts racing, your breath shallow. Could you steady yourself when chaos pressed in? Could you face the helplessness of chance, the knowledge that any second might be your last? The truth, spoken quietly but firmly, is that most of us could not. The mind would break before the body. Fear would swallow us whole. And so once more, we must say, you would not last a day in a medieval battle, not because of the swords or the arrows, but because of the relentless war inside your own mind. Bravery or madness? The strange sources of courage on the battlefield. We have just walked through the storm of fear, that heavy weight pressing on every soldier's chest. Now let us pause and ask a curious question. If fear was so crushing, how did men continue? Why did they not all flee? Why did armies, filled with ordinary people, not dissolve the moment the first arrow flew? The answer is complicated. For what we call courage is often less about the absence of fear and more about strange mixtures of duty, desperation, ritual, and sometimes sheer madness. First, we untangle the word courage. In modern times, we often think of courage as noble calm, the steady refusal to be shaken. Yet medieval courage was rarely calm. It was loud, sweaty, frantic, and raw. It might look like shouting to drown out one's own trembling, or charging forward in a frenzy to silence inner doubt. Courage was rarely neat. It was messy survival, painted with the colors of honor. One of the oldest and simplest sources of courage was companionship. A man rarely fought alone. He stood shoulder to shoulder with brothers, cousins, neighbors, or fellow villagers. When your friend pressed forward, you pressed forward too. To falter meant not only shaming yourself, but betraying those beside you. Imagine standing in a line, shield to shield, with your kin. To flee would mean leaving them to face death without you. That bond, that refusal to abandon, gave men strength to keep their feet planted. Courage also came from ritual and preparation. Before a battle, men prayed, sang hymns, or shouted chants. Drums beat, horns blared, banners waved. These were not mere decorations. They were tools to stiffen the spirit. Rhythm gave order to chaos. Noise drowned out doubt. The bright banner waving in the smoke became a symbol, something to cling to. Ritual lifted courage out of the individual and placed it into the group. One man alone might quail, But 1,000 men chanting together could become something larger, a living wall of resolve. And then there was faith. Religion infused the medieval mind. Many believed that to die in battle, especially in a righteous cause, meant glory in heaven. Priests marched with soldiers, blessing them, promising salvation. When you think your death will earn eternal reward, fear softens and courage swells. Of course, not every man believed so strongly, yet the idea itself gave structure to the madness. Even the thought that God wills it could harden trembling knees. But courage did not always come from lofty sources. Sometimes it came from anger and hate. Men who had lost family or land to raiders found their rage drove them forward. Anger burns hotter than fear, at least for a time. It blinds you to danger, filling your body with reckless energy. In the swirl of battle, hatred of the enemy could make men fight with strength beyond reason. And sometimes, courage was born from something less noble, alcohol. It was not rare for soldiers to drink before fighting. Strong ale or wine dulled fear, numbed thought, and made the body feel bold. A man with drink in his belly might charge faster, shout louder, swing harder. Of course, drink could also make men careless. But for some, that reckless edge was the only way to step onto the field at all. Another form of courage was what we might call ritual madness. Some warriors deliberately whipped themselves into a frenzy. In certain cultures, men painted their faces, shouted wild cries, or struck their own bodies to summon a trance-like state. The Norse berserkers are the most famous example, but echoes of this existed elsewhere too. By turning themselves into something half human, half beast, they drowned fear in frenzy. To their enemies, such men seemed terrifying. To themselves, the madness was a shield. For knights and nobles, courage was bound up with honor and reputation. A knight who turned away from battle risked not just shame, but loss of status, land, or patronage. Their entire social standing rested on bravery. To fight was to prove worth. To falter was to lose everything. This pressure forged a peculiar kind of courage, one born less from inner strength than from outer necessity. It was not, I want to be brave, but I cannot afford not to be. Then there is the courage born of resignation. Sometimes, when a man realized there was no escape, he fought with desperate resolve. Imagine being trapped, knowing flight is impossible, knowing mercy will not be given. At that moment, fear collapses into a strange calm. You have nothing left to lose, so you give everything. This desperate courage can be the fiercest of all, for a cornered man fights like one already dead. And yet, we must be honest, not all courage was what it seemed. Sometimes, what looked like bravery was simply obedience. Soldiers were drilled, threatened, or forced into line. Fear of punishment from their own commanders could outweigh fear of the enemy. Some armies placed strong men with clubs at the rear to strike down anyone who tried to flee. Others threatened families back home. In such cases, courage was a mask for compulsion. The man stood not because he chose bravery, but because he had no other choice. Still, even with these supports, courage was fragile. It could crack in a moment. A banner falling, a commander slain, a sudden rout, and the thin veil of bravery tore away, replaced by stampeding panic. Armies that seemed unstoppable could dissolve in minutes when courage failed. This shows us how delicate it was, how much effort it took to keep men steady. Imagine again that you are there. Fear still coils inside you, but the voices around you chant. A horn blares. The priest blesses you. Your cousin grips your shoulder and shouts that you must hold the line. The man on your right begins to sing. The man on your left begins to roar. And so, against all reason, your feet remain. You march. You lift your shield. You scream to drown your own terror. And for a brief moment, it feels like courage. But let us be gentle in our judgment. What we call courage in those moments was not the polished bravery of stories. It was survival dressed in many forms: faith, anger, duty, madness, or resignation. It was imperfect, shaky, sometimes ugly. Yet without it, battles would not have been fought. And here is the final twist. Was it truly courage at all, or was it a kind of madness forced by the world of war? Perhaps both, for in truth, courage and madness share a thin border. To run into a storm of arrows, to clash steel against steel while death surrounds you, this is not natural. It is extraordinary. It requires something beyond calm reason. Call it bravery, call it madness. Perhaps it is both. And so, the strange answer to our question is this: medieval men fought not because they banished fear, but because they carried it, twisted it, and reshaped it into something that looked like courage. But beneath it all, the trembling heart remained, which leaves us, safe in our quiet beds centuries later, to admit once again you would not last a day on a medieval battlefield. Not because you lacked weapons, but because you lacked the strange, brutal alchemy that turned terror into courage. Leaders and commanders, masters of fear and courage, so far we have looked through the eyes of the ordinary soldier. We have felt his fear, traced the roots of his courage, and seen how fragile both could be. But we cannot leave the battlefield without turning our gaze toward another figure: the commander, the leader, the one who had to stand above the mass of trembling men and somehow bend their fear into order. A medieval army was not simply a group of armed men. It was a living creature made of many bodies. The commander was its mind, its nervous system, the one who had to keep the legs from running and the arms from dropping their weapons. Without a leader, soldiers could quickly dissolve into chaos. With a leader, that chaos could be molded into something fearsome. The art of leadership in battle was, at its core, the art of controlling fear. Not removing it, no one could remove fear, but shaping it. A good commander knew how to hold terror in check, how to give his men reasons to stand, and how to channel their dread into action. One of the simplest ways leaders did this was through presence. Imagine a knightly lord riding along the line of his troops, his horse tall, his armor gleaming, his voice ringing. To the tired, frightened men on foot, that figure was not just a man but a symbol. His calmness suggested that victory was possible. His armor shone like hope itself. In many battles, the mere sight of a confident commander stiffened spines. But presence was not always enough. Leaders also used words. Before a clash, it was common for commanders to give speeches. These were not long essays, but sharp bursts of energy. They reminded men of home, of honor, of God, of vengeance. They stirred pride, painted the enemy as weak or wicked, promised victory if only courage held a little longer. Words mattered deeply. A speech could turn a wavering line into a roaring tide. Beyond words came symbols, banners, standards, coats of arms. These were the heartbeats of armies. The banner of a lord was not only decoration, it was a rallying point, a visible promise that leadership still stood. If the banner fell, panic spread, for it meant the commander might be dead. If the banner waved high, men felt anchored. Leaders understood this and guarded their standards fiercely. Losing one was more than a military blow. It was a wound to courage itself. Commanders also controlled fear through ritual order. They arranged troops in formations that gave men a sense of structure. A line of spearmen, shoulder to shoulder, felt safer than scattered fighters. Clear commands, drums, horns, and flags told soldiers what to do, reducing the terror of uncertainty. When fear surged, routine could keep men moving like parts of a single machine. And let us not forget punishment and discipline. Leaders knew that fear could scatter armies, so they sometimes balanced one fear with another. To flee the enemy meant death or shame, but to flee one's own commander might also mean death. Some lords placed trusted retainers or guards behind the main line with orders to strike down anyone who ran. Others threatened loss of land or harsh penalties for desertion. This grim balance of fear kept men in place. Yet discipline alone could not hold men forever. A wise commander also offered rewards. Promises of plunder, of ransom, of honor, and of advancement were powerful. A man who believed bravery might earn him gold or land found his courage swelling. Leaders knew this and reminded their men that victory meant not only survival but gain. Religious leaders also played a role. Priests or monks sometimes marched alongside armies. Their blessings gave divine weight to the cause. A soldier told he fought under God's gaze felt less alone. A commander who secured such spiritual backing added another layer of courage to his men. Faith became a tool of leadership, binding men to something higher than fear. But leadership was not always calm or noble. Sometimes commanders used raw emotion to control their troops. A furious leader, shouting and cursing, could push men into action through sheer intensity. Others used scorn, calling their soldiers cowards to shame them into bravery. Harsh words could sting men into proving themselves. The battlefield was not a place of gentle encouragement, but of desperate urgency, where any method that kept men standing was used. Consider also the importance of personal example. Many medieval commanders did not sit safely at the back, but fought in the thick of battle. Kings, lords, and knights often led charges themselves. To see one's leader fighting with the same risks, the same dangers, inspired soldiers. It showed that courage was not demanded from below alone, but shared at every level. But leadership was fragile. If a commander fell, armies often collapsed. The death of a king or lord could turn courage into panic. Medieval chronicles are filled with tales of armies breaking apart after their leader was slain. The leader's life was not just his own. It was tied to the courage of thousands. Leadership also required reading the moment. A commander had to know when to push forward, when to hold back, when to feign retreat, when to unleash reserves. Each choice shaped the balance of fear and courage. Too early a charge, and men might falter. Too long a wait, and nerves might crack. It was a delicate dance, and the best leaders were those who sensed the tide of fear and moved with it. Let us not forget, too, that commanders themselves felt fear. A leader might appear calm, but inside he trembled like any man. His courage came not from lacking fear, but from mastering its appearance. The calm face of a commander was a mask worn for the sake of his men. If he showed doubt, the whole army might crumble. In this way, leadership was as much theatre as strategy, a performance of bravery staged for thousands of watching eyes. Imagine yourself once more among the soldiers. Your heart pounds, your mouth is dry, and every instinct says, "Run." But then your lord rides past. His armor shines, his banner flaps, his voice rings with promises of victory. You feel the weight of your fellows beside you, the shame of abandoning them, the hope of spoils ahead. Your fear does not vanish, but it bends. For the moment, you believe. For the moment, you stand. And this is why leadership mattered so much. In a world where fear could break armies in an instant, the commander was the one who held the thread together. Without him, courage frayed. With him, even trembling men could hold the line. So when we look back and ask why medieval men fought on those brutal fields, the answer is never simple. But one answer stands clear. They fought because their leaders made them believe, or fear, or hope. They fought because someone stood above the chaos and told them they could. Which leaves us again with the same quiet truth. You would not last a day on a medieval battlefield, not without a leader to steady your heart and turn your fear into courage. The noise and chaos of battle. Sound as a weapon of fear. If you imagine a medieval battle as silent except for the clash of swords, you are picturing the wrong scene. Silence did not exist on the battlefield. The air was alive, filled with a storm of sound, and every note of that storm struck directly at the nerves of the men caught inside it. To truly understand fear and courage, we must step into that noise. Begin with the roar of voices. When armies faced one another, shouting was a weapon long before blades touched. Soldiers bellowed insults, war cries, prayers, chants. The sound was not polite speech, but raw, animal noise, deep, ragged, wild. Each man's shout joined thousands of others until the massed roar rolled like thunder across the field. Imagine standing in front of that wall of sound, hearing thousands of throats screaming in fury. Even before the fighting began, your courage began to shake. Then came the blare of instruments. Horns, trumpets, and drums filled the air. These were not just for show, they gave commands and rhythm, binding men together. But they also magnified terror. The sudden blast of a horn could jolt the heart like a strike. The steady beat of a drum could pound dread into your chest. The enemy's horns were worst of all, for they meant the charge was coming. To hear those signals was to know that death was moving closer. Add to this the clash of metal. Swords against shields, axes against helmets, spears against armor. Each strike rang loud and sharp. When hundreds of blows landed at once, the sound was deafening. Metal screamed, clanged, and splintered. For a soldier, it was like standing inside a bell as it was struck again and again. The noise pounded into the skull until thought itself felt broken. There was also the thunder of feet and hooves. When cavalry charged, the ground itself shook. The drumming of hooves grew from a distant hum into a rolling earthquake. Men felt it in their bones before they heard it in their ears. That rumble told them the storm was nearly upon them, and few sounds carried more terror. Even steady infantry feet, thousands stamping together, made the earth tremble, reminding every soldier of the sheer weight of the force pressing against him. And then, most dreadful of all, came the human cries. Screams of pain, shouts of rage, groans of the dying, all poured into the air without pause. Some men begged for mercy, others cursed their killers, others wailed in agony. These sounds were not distant, they were right beside you. Perhaps your friend fell, his scream ringing in your ears. Perhaps an enemy howled as you struck him. Either way, the noise carved itself into your mind. Soldiers sometimes spoke later of the screams they could never forget. Amid all this, there was no chance for quiet reflection. The noise created confusion. Orders shouted by commanders were swallowed by the storm. Men lost track of which side was winning. In the chaos, courage could slip away unnoticed, hidden beneath the roar. Many fled, not because they saw defeat, but because the overwhelming noise convinced them it was already at hand. The noise also had strange effects. For some, it created panic, a choking sense of being trapped in a whirl of sound. They froze or fled. For others, it created a kind of frenzy. The drumbeats and shouting whipped them into a state where fear blurred and rage took over. Some men said they felt drunk on the sound of battle, carried beyond themselves. Courage in such moments was not calm bravery, but wild abandon. We must also remember the psychological tricks of sound. Commanders used noise to frighten enemies deliberately. War cries were chosen to sound monstrous. The Norse, for example, howled like wolves. Some groups banged weapons on shields to make themselves seem more numerous. The sudden unified roar of an entire line charging was meant to crush morale before weapons even touched flesh. To the men facing it, the sound alone might feel like a physical blow. And yet, within that chaos, men also found anchors. The sound of their own side's chants, the voice of a familiar comrade, the rhythm of a shared drumbeat, these held soldiers together. In the ocean of terror, small points of sound became lifelines. To hear your leader shouting still, to hear your brothers beside you roaring the same words, told you that you were not alone. Those sounds gave courage, even as the rest of the battle tried to drown it. Imagine yourself once more, standing in the press. Your shield rattles as swords strike it. Your ears ring with horns and screams. Your chest shakes with the drum of hooves. You try to hear your own breath, but even that is lost in the roar. The world is nothing but noise. It pounds into you, breaking thought, smothering calm. You feel your courage slipping like water through your hands. And yet, above it all, you catch a sound, the steady voice of your leader, the chant of your fellows, The beat of your own side's drum. You cling to that sound, and somehow you keep standing. This, too, is why you would not last a day on a medieval battlefield. Not just the weapons, not just the wounds, but the sound itself would batter you down. Your ears would ring, your heart would shake. Your courage would drown beneath the thunder of voices, horns, metal, and screams. Fear was not only in the mind, it was in the air, carried on every wave of sound. And so the battlefield was as much a storm of noise as a storm of steel. The two were inseparable, each feeding the other, each shaping the fragile balance between fear and courage. The stench of war, smell, sickness, and the hidden enemy. When we imagine a medieval battlefield, we often think of sights and sounds, the clash of steel and the cries of men. But there is another sense that shaped the experience, one we rarely picture, yet one that every soldier carried with him: smell. The battlefield had its own stench, and that stench carried terror of its own. First, there was the smell of sweat. Thousands of men, marching in heavy armor beneath a hot sun, produced a suffocating odor. Leather straps grew damp, cloth padding soaked through, helmets filled with stale breath. The press of bodies in a shield wall was not just suffocating in space, but suffocating in scent. A soldier surrounded by comrades stood in a haze of human sweat, the sharp salt sting of it filling his nose. Then came the smell of horses. Cavalry mounts sweated, foamed at the mouth, and fouled the ground where they stood. In a large battle, hundreds of horses produced a barnyard reek of sweat and manure that clung to the air. For infantry facing a cavalry charge, this smell was part of the terror. It was the smell of weight, speed, and hooves that could trample a man to pieces. But the most dreadful smells came when the fighting began. The smell of blood was everywhere. Fresh blood has a sharp metallic scent, like iron or rust. On a battlefield, wounds spilled so much of it that the ground itself smelled of iron. Men said the air felt thick, as though it had weight, heavy with the copper tang of blood. Once you noticed it, you could not escape it. Beside blood came the smell of wounds, torn flesh, opened intestines, smashed bones. These released odors far fouler than blood alone. Soldiers often spoke of the sickly sweet smell of injury, a smell that clung to them long after the battle ended. Some wounds spilled the contents of the stomach or bowels, and then the air carried the stench of rot while men were still alive. This, more than the sight, turned the stomach and broke the spirit. And then there was smoke. Many battles were fought near villages or fields set ablaze. Smoke filled the lungs, stung the eyes, and burned the throat. Mixed with the smell of blood and sweat, it made the very air feel poisoned. Soldiers gasped for breath, not only from fear or exhaustion, but because the air itself was harsh. But the worst smells came after the battle. Bodies left unburied began to rot quickly. In warm weather, the stench rose within hours. It was not just unpleasant, it was overwhelming. Men, gagged, covered their faces and still could not escape it. Sometimes the smell carried for miles, a reminder of slaughter long after swords were sheathed, and with rot came disease. On battlefields, wounds festered quickly. Without clean water or knowledge of germs, even small cuts turned deadly. Flies swarmed over corpses and then landed on the living. Infected wounds gave off their own foul odor, a sour, sickly stench that soldiers dreaded as much as the pain itself. To smell your own wound turning bad was to smell your death approaching. The connection between smell and fear was strong. A sudden whiff of rot could convince a man that sickness was spreading. The stink of burning could trigger panic about being trapped in flames. Even the ordinary reek of sweat and horses became reminders of exhaustion and danger. Courage was not only a battle against fear of the sword, but against the air itself. Some commanders understood this. They sometimes marched prisoners ahead of them in filthy conditions to disgust and frighten enemies. In sieges, rotting carcasses were hurled over walls to poison the air. War was not only fought with steel, but with stench. Imagine again that you are there. The battle rages around you. And you are not only seeing the clash and hearing the roar, but breathing the foul air. Sweat stings your nose. Horses fill the wind with their stink. Smoke burns your throat. Then you catch the metallic tang of blood, sharp and heavy, until it feels as if you are breathing iron itself. You gag but cannot stop breathing. Every breath reminds you of death. After the battle, you stumble across the field. The ground is littered with the fallen. The smell rises before you see the bodies. It is sweet, sour, rancid, overwhelming. Flies rise in clouds, and the stink clings to your clothes, your hair, your skin. Even when you leave, the odor follows. Many veterans spoke of this. The way the battlefield never left their noses. The way sleep itself brought the smells back. This, too, is why you would not last a day on a medieval battlefield. Not only would your body and mind be battered by fear, sound, and violence, but your very breath would carry terror into your lungs. The air itself was an enemy, thick with sweat, blood, smoke, and decay. Courage was not simply the act of standing firm. It was the act of breathing without fleeing when every breath carried horror. So we must remember, medieval battles were not only sights and sounds, they were also smells. And those smells shaped fear as much as swords. Courage meant holding your ground not just against steel, but against the stench of death itself. The crushing burden, armor, exhaustion, and the fight against your own body. When we picture a medieval knight or soldier, we often see the shining armor, the noble figure on horseback, or the proud warrior standing ready. But what we do not feel, in our comfortable chairs centuries later, is the sheer weight pressing down on that man. Armor was protection, yes, but it was also a prison of iron, and every step inside it was a battle long before the enemy ever appeared. Let us start with the knight in full plate. His suit could weigh anywhere from 45 to 60 pounds, sometimes more. That may not sound terrible when you compare it to lifting weights at the gym, but imagine wearing that much, not in a single lift, but spread across your whole body for hours at a time. The steel did not sit lightly. It pressed on the shoulders, pinched at the joints, rubbed raw against the skin beneath. Add a helmet, a sword, and maybe a shield, and suddenly every breath, every motion demanded strength. Even lighter armor, like chainmail, came with its own curse. A full hauberk of mail could weigh 30 pounds or more, all made of interlinked rings. Unlike plate, which spread the load, mail sagged heavily on the shoulders, dragging down the chest and back. The constant pull made it feel like you were being slowly crushed. Soldiers joked grimly that wearing mail was like being hugged by death itself, always clinging, always pulling you down. And beneath the metal, men wore padding, thick gambesons stuffed with wool or linen. These padded jackets protected against bruising and blunted the edge of blades, but they were hot, stifling, and soaked quickly with sweat. In summer battles, men sweltered. In rain, the fabric absorbed water, doubling in weight. Once wet, it clung like a sodden blanket, making every motion sluggish. Now imagine marching in this. Before many battles, soldiers trudged for miles carrying their gear. Feet blistered, backs ached, and already they were tired before the fighting began. Exhaustion was a constant shadow. Some collapsed before even reaching the battlefield. Others staggered into position, drained before the first arrow flew. And then came the fighting itself. A shield raised high seemed manageable for a few minutes, but after an hour, your arm trembled. A sword swung with force at first became sluggish, desperate. Sweat poured into eyes, muscles cramped, and armor rubbed sores into skin. Exhaustion gnawed at courage because a tired body makes a fearful mind. When your legs shake and your chest heaves, fear whispers louder. You cannot last. You will fall. You will die. Consider too the heat. A man in armor under the sun baked as though inside an oven. Helmets trapped heat, making faces flush red, lips crack, and minds swim. Some fainted inside their armor, collapsing without ever being struck. To die of heat and exhaustion before a sword touched you was not uncommon. even those who survived the battle carried the pain after. Shoulders bruised black, backs wrenched, joints swollen. Removing the armor revealed raw skin, chafed until it bled. Sleep brought no rest, only aches. Some men limped permanently from battles, not because of wounds, but because armor had crushed their bodies day after day. But armor was not only a burden of weight, it was a burden of fear. Imagine hearing the enemy approaching while you were still, struggling to fasten your straps, your helmet, your buckles. Imagine feeling trapped inside your own shell, unable to move swiftly, unable to breathe deeply. For some, panic rose before battle even began, because the armor itself felt like a cage. And yet, armor was also life. Men knew that without it, they would fall quickly. So they endured the weight, the heat, the exhaustion, because the alternative was worse. Courage, then, was not just the act of charging into enemy lines. It was the quiet endurance of dragging your own body, wrapped in metal, hour after hour, step after step, against the whispering voice of weakness. Now picture yourself again. You, wake at dawn, already weary from a march the day before. Your padded gambeson clings to your body, damp with yesterday's sweat. You struggle into your chainmail, each ring biting at your shoulders. A comrade helps fasten your helmet. The air feels close, your breath echoes inside the steel shell. Your back aches, your neck strains. You lift your sword, and already it feels heavy. The trumpet sounds. You take your place. Your knees shake not from fear alone, but from the sheer exhaustion of standing under the weight. The enemy appears, and you think not only of his sword, but of your own body betraying you. Your muscles burn, your lungs gasp. You stumble forward, fighting not only the enemy, but the weight that drags you down with every step. Would you last? Could you swing again and again, shield raised, blade cutting, while sweat poured and muscles screamed? Could you stand upright, as the sun beat down, your helmet cooking your head, your armor pressing on your chest? Few today could. Most would collapse from exhaustion before a single blow struck them. This is another hidden truth of medieval courage. It was not merely the courage to face swords and arrows, but the courage to endure the slow torture of weight and exhaustion. Every knight, every foot soldier, waged a war against his own body before he ever met the enemy. That is why medieval battles were as much contests of endurance as of skill. The strongest man was not always the victor. The one who endured the longest, who bore the crushing burden of armor and exhaustion without breaking, was the one who survived. And this is why, once again, you would not last a day on a medieval battlefield. Not because you lack courage of the heart, but because your body, softened by comfort, would crumble beneath the armor long before your spirit did. The weight would crush you, the heat would weaken you, and exhaustion would whisper its terrible truth, that even before the enemy reached you, you had already been defeated by your own body. The thunder of hooves, facing the cavalry charge. Close your eyes and imagine silence. The battlefield waits, men standing in tense lines, gripping spears and shields, their mouths dry, their breaths shallow. Then, faintly at first, you hear it, a dull rumble, far away. A vibration beneath your feet, steady, growing. You glance up and see them. Dark shapes on the horizon. Horses. At first they seem small, distant. But the sound grows louder, the shapes grow larger. The earth begins to tremble, dust rises, and the air quivers with the rhythm of 100 pounding hooves. The cavalry is charging. To a medieval foot soldier, nothing inspired more fear than the sight of armored knights bearing down upon you. At full speed, these were not small, farmyard ponies. War horses were powerful beasts, bred and trained for strength and aggression. Many stood taller than a man, weighing half a ton or more. Their sheer size was terrifying. A single horse at full gallop could smash through a line of men like a wave through reeds. Multiply that by dozens, even hundreds, and you faced a living storm of muscle, steel, and fury. And remember, these beasts were not alone. On their backs rode armored knights, gleaming in steel, lances lowered like deadly spears. The knights themselves were fearsome enough, but together with their horses they became something greater, something monstrous. Man and beast fused into a charging weapon that seemed unstoppable. Imagine yourself in that line. Your commander orders you to hold steady. You clutch your spear with sweaty hands. Your knees tremble, your breath comes fast, but you try to keep your footing. The thunder grows deafening now, hooves pounding like drums of war. You see the whites of the horses' eyes, the gleam of lances, the banners flapping. They are almost upon you. Everything inside you screams to run, to drop your weapon and flee. Your body knows instinctively what your mind also tells you. A wall of half-ton beasts will crush you flat. Fear rises in your throat like bile. Some men did run, and when they did, they doomed themselves, for cavalry loved nothing more than chasing down the fleeing. A running man was easy prey, so courage meant standing still against all instinct, forming tight ranks with your fellows, shields locked together, spears braced like a forest of points. Only by presenting a wall of deadly wood and iron could foot soldiers hope to repel the charge. But even then, it was not certain. Horses could shy away from sharp points, yes, but sometimes the press from behind forced them onward. A horse driven by momentum could not always stop. When they crashed into a line, men were thrown aside, trampled, crushed under hooves. A spear thrust could kill a knight or a horse, but many times the sheer force of the charge smashed the formation apart anyway. Think of the sound, the screaming of men, the neighing of horses, the clashing of iron on wood. Think of the sight, men flung into the air, bodies broken under hooves, shields splintering, blood spraying. A cavalry charge was not just a physical attack, it was a weapon of terror. It aimed to break the courage of infantry before the knights' lances even struck home. And what of those lances? Imagine one, 10 to 12 feet long, tipped with steel, aimed directly at your chest. At full gallop, the impact was devastating, like being hit by a speeding car. Even if the lance broke on your shield, the shock could knock you down, leaving you helpless on the ground as hooves thundered over you. For those caught beneath the charge, death was often brutal, trampled, suffocated, their bodies broken in, ways too gruesome to describe. Survivors recalled the horror of hearing bones snap, of seeing comrades flattened into the earth. The psychological effect was as powerful as the physical. Many chroniclers tell us that whole armies broke and fled at the sight of an oncoming cavalry charge, without a single blow exchanged. Men simply could not bear the terror, and yet some did stand. The bravest, or perhaps the most desperate, planted. Their feet gripped their spears and trusted in their brothers beside them. When such a line held, when horses balked at the wall of points, when knights tumbled from saddles pierced by spears, the infantry could triumph. Songs were sung of such victories, for they were rare and glorious. Now place yourself there again. The earth shakes. The thunder deafens you. The enemy knights bear down, shining like avenging angels or demons, depending on your faith. Your spear trembles in your hand. Do you stand firm or do you run? Do you have the courage to face not just a man with a sword but half a ton of muscle charging at you with murderous intent? Think of the difference between now and then. In your modern life, the loudest noise you might hear in danger is perhaps the screech of car brakes. On the battlefield, the sound was thunder itself, alive, unstoppable. Could you stand unmoving as the wave approached? Or would your body betray you, your legs carrying you away in panic? This, again, is why we say you would not last a day on a medieval battlefield. Because courage there was not just about facing men with swords. It was about standing in the path of living storms, creatures of flesh and steel charging like thunder, knowing that one slip, one falter, and you would be trampled into the mud. The cavalry charge was terror incarnate, and only the strongest of spirit could face it without breaking. Arrows from the sky, death that fell like rain. The clash of swords and the thunder of cavalry are terrifying enough. But there was another kind of fear on the medieval battlefield, one that came not from what you could see charging toward you, but from what you could not stop at all. Arrows. Picture yourself standing in a line of infantry. The sun hangs high above. The field is quiet, except for the distant movement of troops. Then, far ahead, you notice a shimmer. A line of men with long, curved bows, raising them toward the sky. Perhaps they are English longbowmen, their bows nearly as tall as a man. Or perhaps they are Turkish horse archers, fast and deadly. In either case, you suddenly know what is coming. A whistle cuts the air, then 100, 1,000 more. Arrows rise high into the sky, glinting in the light like a swarm of black birds. For a heartbeat there is silence, men frozen, heads tilted upward. Then, with a rushing hiss, they fall. Imagine the sound. A rainstorm of death, the air filled with the sharp whistling of wooden shafts, the thudding of iron tips striking earth and flesh. Imagine the sight. Men pierced through arms, necks, faces, shields bristling with arrows like porcupine quills, horses rearing in panic as their flanks are struck. The worst part was the helplessness. Against a man with a sword, you could swing, your own. Against cavalry, you could brace a spear, but against arrows, all you could do was stand, lift your shield, and hope. Hope that the shafts would not find the gaps in your armor. Hope that the rain would fall on someone else. Think of how long it could last. Archers could fire 6, 10, even 12 arrows a minute. A storm that went on, wave after wave, until the ground was carpeted with shafts. And not every arrow needed to kill. Some struck legs, arms, feet. A wound might bleed slowly, or fester later, but for the moment it took you out of the fight. Enough arrows, and an army was crippled, before swords ever touched. Now imagine the fear of hearing that command shouted across the enemy line. Loose! A single word that meant death was on its way. In the seconds before the arrows landed, men would duck, shield themselves, sometimes even crouch low behind the bodies of fallen comrades. The anticipation itself was torture. And then, sometimes, it was not arrows but bolts. Crossbows fired shorter, heavier missiles with crushing force. A crossbow bolt could pierce mail armor, even plate at close range. The sound of a bolt striking flesh or shield was not a whistle, but a hard, brutal thunk, followed often by a scream. Crossbows were slower to reload than bows, but their power made them feared across Europe. Picture yourself again. You stand in the line, sweat dripping down your face, shield heavy on your arm. You hear the hiss above, the falling rain. A shaft strikes your shield with a violent shock that numbs your arm. Another pierces the man beside you, who cries out and crumples. An arrow strikes the earth at your feet, quivering, a reminder of how close death passed, and yet you cannot leave your place. If you run, you expose your back. You become an easy target. You must hold. So you stand, trapped, waiting for the next storm to fall. This is why missile fire was more than just a physical weapon. It was psychological. Soldiers began to fear the sky itself. Chroniclers describe men too afraid to lift their heads, crouching, beneath shields, unable to see the enemy for fear of the next volley. An army that feared the sky could not fight with confidence. And it was not only arrows. Slingers hurled stones with deadly force, striking faces and skulls with bone-crushing speed. Javelins whistled through the air, hurled by strong arms. Each weapon, in its way, rained down upon men who could do nothing but endure. Sometimes, entire battles turned on arrow storms. Think of Crécy in 1346, when English longbowmen loosed clouds of arrows into the French knights, their horses collapsing in heaps, their proud charge broken before it began. Or Agincourt in 1415, where muddy ground and endless volleys left armoured, men helpless, stuck and slaughtered. But for the ordinary soldier, there was no glory in such moments, only fear. The fear of hearing that hiss, of raising your shield too late, of feeling the sudden sting in your flesh. A wound might not kill you immediately, but infection in the days after often did. A scratch became a fever became death. So again we ask, would you last a day here? Could you stand in an open field as death fell like rain from the sky with no place to hide? Could you hold steady while comrades around you dropped one by one, pierced and bleeding, while the storm showed no mercy? Modern life gives us shelter from the sky, a roof, a wall, safety from rain and storm. But on a battlefield, the very heavens seem to turn against you. Arrows, bolts, stones, they fell not from clouds, but from human hands, and they fell without pity. You would not last a day, not because of weakness, but because the fear of helplessness, of waiting for the unseen strike, is more than most hearts can endure. The medieval soldier knew that terror well. It was part of his daily bread, his prayer before battle, his nightmare in the dark. So next time you hear the wind whistle through the trees, think of that sound. Not as harmless nature, but as the echo of a storm of arrows, a rain of death that once blotted out the sky, the wall of spears. When lines collided, the storm of arrows passes, but there is no time to breathe. Ahead, you see the enemy's line closing in. Shields rise, spears lower, boots thud against the ground in rhythm. The archers fall back. Now comes the moment that every soldier dreads. The clash. Imagine it. Two human walls moving toward one another. Men packed shoulder to shoulder, each gripping a shield in one hand and a spear in the other. Shields overlap, forming a wall of wood, leather and iron. Spears jut out from behind, like the quills of a giant beast. The noise builds before impact. The pounding of feet, the cries of commanders, the growing roar of men shouting to drown out their fear. Then comes the crash. Shields slam against shields with a sound like breaking trees. The air shakes with the impact of hundreds of bodies, colliding at once. Suddenly, you are no longer a free individual on an open field. You are locked in a crush of flesh, wood, and steel. Your shield is pressed into your chest. Your spear jabs forward through the narrow space in front of you, and behind you, another man pushes forward, forcing you on. The shield wall was both protection and prison. From a distance, it looked strong, solid, even invincible. But from within, it was suffocating. You could barely move, barely breathe. Sweat poured down your face, not from heat alone, but from the fear of being trapped. Unable to retreat. Picture trying to fight like this. Your spear thrusts forward blindly, hoping to find a gap in the enemy's wall. The enemy does the same, and their spear points dart toward you like angry snakes. Sometimes the thrusts strike shields, sometimes they glance off helmets, sometimes, too often, they strike flesh. Imagine the man to your left screaming as a spear tip punches through his thigh. Imagine the man to your right slumping forward as a blade slips beneath his helmet. You cannot step aside to help them. You cannot step back to escape. The wall holds you in place, and the pressure never stops. Each line pushes against the other, the weight of hundreds of men pressing forward, trying to break through. Your chest is crushed against your shield, your legs strain to hold steady. If you stumble, if you fall, you are finished. The man behind you will push forward. The enemy in front will trample over you, and you will be buried beneath boots and bodies. Think about how terrifying that is. Not just the enemy, but your own comrades could become your doom. A man falling. In the shield wall was like a stone removed from a dam. The hole widened, the pressure shifted, and soon the wall itself could break. That is what commanders feared most. Not just death, but disorder. The clash of spears was not quick. It dragged on, a grinding, suffocating struggle where minutes felt like hours. Sometimes both sides stood locked for what seemed like eternity, men stabbing and shoving until exhaustion weakened one line. Other times the break came suddenly. A few men fell, a gap opened, and the enemy surged through like water through a crack. Imagine that moment. The shield wall buckles. Your comrades stumble back. the enemy floods in with shouts of triumph. Now the line is no more. Now it becomes chaos, man against man, shield forgotten, spears discarded, swords flashing in the crush. But even before the collapse, even in the order of the shield wall, there was terror. Terror of the spear point darting toward your eyes, of the press crushing your chest, of the ground beneath you turning slick with blood so that your feet slipped at the worst moment, and all the while, the sound. Think of it. The crash of wood, the grunt of men, the screams of the wounded, the roar of commanders urging you on. The sound was overwhelming, filling your ears, drowning out thought. You were no longer yourself. You were one piece of a massive, groaning, grinding machine of flesh and wood. Now picture the smell. Sweat, leather, damp wool, iron, and beneath it all, the metallic tang of blood. The stench of men who had marched, for miles before battle, now pressed chest to chest in combat, their breaths hot on your face. If you are imagining claustrophobia, you are not far from the truth. For many men, the shield wall was as terrifying as any dungeon. And remember, this was not just a test of muscle. It was a test of nerve. You had to hold your place, no matter what. To run was to doom not only yourself, but the men beside you. To falter was to open the gap that would let the enemy flood in. So you clenched your jaw, gripped your spear, and prayed that today would not be your last. The medieval soldier lived with this truth. Survival was not only about strength, but about standing firm in the wall. Victory was not a matter of heroics, but of endurance. Who could last longer in the crush? Who could hold steady while their comrades fell? Who could thrust and thrust again with arms that ached and shook? Could you? Could you stand in that suffocating press, your body crushed, your ears ringing, your lungs straining for air, your arms trembling with fatigue, while death lurked inches away on the other side of a wooden plank? Most of us could not. Most of us would break, turn, flee. And once one man fled, the wall itself began to crumble, and with it, the army's hope. This was the reality of the battlefield. Not noble duels between shining knights, but walls of men pressed together like cattle, stabbing blindly through narrow gaps, struggling to hold a line that could collapse at any moment. So, when you next see a movie showing clean duels and swift battles, remember this. The truth was slower, dirtier, and far more terrifying. The shield wall was the beating heart of medieval war, and for those trapped inside it, it was not glory they felt, but dread. You would not last a day here, not because you lacked courage, but because no one, then or now, could stand in that wall without fear gnawing at their soul. The men who did so not because they were fearless, but because they had no choice. That was the shield wall, a prison of flesh, a wall of spears, and for many, the last place they ever stood, the hooves of doom. When horses thundered toward you, the shield wall holds, at least for now. Spears jab, shields groan, men shout and die, and somehow you are still standing. But then, above the chaos, a new sound rises. At first, it is faint, a rumble in the distance, like thunder rolling across hills. You might think it is the storm coming back, but it is not thunder, it is hooves. Look up. Over the heads of the enemy, you see them. Cavalry. Dozens, maybe hundreds of horsemen. They form into a line. Armored riders on massive destriers, long lances jutting out before them. The sunlight glints on polished helms. Banners flutter in the wind. And for a moment, the sight almost looks beautiful. Then you remember, they are riding at you. Try to imagine it. A wall of horses, each one weighing half a ton, each one bred and trained for war. Their hooves strike the ground like drums, each beat shaking the earth beneath your feet. The riders lean forward, spurs digging, lances steady. The line begins to move faster, the rumble grows into a roar, your chest vibrates with it. This is the nightmare of every foot soldier, standing in place, waiting as the wall of muscle and steel bears down on you. Your shield feels suddenly small, your spear suddenly thin. How can a man of flesh and bone stand against a charging horse? Your captain shouts orders. Hold the line! Brace the spears! The front rank drops to one knee, planting spear butts in the ground and angling the points upward. The second rank lowers theirs over the shoulders of the first. A deadly hedge of points forms, your only hope of stopping the cavalry. But will it hold? Picture yourself in the front row, kneeling, gripping your spear shaft so tightly your knuckles ache. The ground shakes harder now. Dust rises, thrown up by pounding hooves. You can see the riders' eyes, the snorting nostrils of the horses, the froth at their mouths. They are close, far too close. Every instinct screams at you to run, but you cannot. You are locked in the wall. Behind you, men press forward, trapping you in place. In front of you, the storm bears down. Then, impact. The first horses slam into the hedge of spears. Some impale themselves, screaming as iron tips punch through hide and muscle. Riders topple, crushed beneath their own beasts. But not all are stopped. Some horses shear to the side, crashing into shields. The weight of the animal smashes you backward. Your shoulder burns as it is nearly wrenched from its socket. Your ears ring with the sound of bone meeting wood, of lances striking shields, of screams, always screams. If even a few riders break through, the line buckles. They ride between ranks, slashing with swords, trampling with hooves. Men scatter, spears fall, and suddenly, order gives way to chaos. Once the wall breaks, the cavalry pours in like wolves into a flock. Now imagine the fear before that moment. You know what is coming. You know you must stand. And you know that even if you do everything right, you may still be crushed. Horses do not stop easily. Even a dead mount becomes a weapon, collapsing into your line, knocking men sprawling beneath its weight. And remember, the rider is not just sitting idly. He wields a lance, sometimes tipped with steel, long enough to reach past your spear. A well-aimed strike can pierce your shield, your mail, your body, before you even touch him. If the lance breaks, the sword comes out. Cavalrymen were trained to fight from horseback, to swing down on you with terrifying reach. The terror is not only in the impact, but in the waiting. Standing in place as the thunder grows louder, as the line of horses grows larger, as every second stretches into eternity. Your legs shake, your mouth goes dry, your heart pounds so loudly you wonder if the man next to you can hear it. To run feels natural, but to run is death. Alone, you are easy prey. Only the wall offers hope, so you hold, and you pray. Pray that your spear will hold firm. Pray that the man beside you will not break. Pray that the horses will falter before the hedge. But in many battles, the wall did not hold. The cavalry smashed through, broke the ranks, and turned the tide. Chronicles often describe the shock of the charge as the decisive moment. Not because of sheer numbers, but because of fear. Men who could stand against other men often could not stand against horses. Think of it this way. You are not only fighting flesh. You are fighting terror itself. The sight, the sound, the weight. It overwhelms the senses. It breaks the nerve. And in war, broken nerves kill as surely as blades. Could you stand there, spear-braced, waiting as a warhorse bore down on you? Could you hold your ground when the world itself seemed to be shaking? Most of us could not. Most of us would falter. And faltering in the shield wall is the end. That was the nightmare of medieval battle. Not just man against man, but man against beast, against the raw thunder of cavalry. For those who stood in that moment, it was not glory they felt. It was fear, sweat, trembling, and the desperate hope to live another day. You would not last here. None of us would. The lasting echoes of the battlefield. So we have walked together through the noise and the dust, through the shouting of captains and the groaning of shields, through the sharp terror of arrows falling and the thunder of horses charging. We have stepped into the narrow world of the medieval battlefield, not as kings or commanders, but as the ordinary soldier who had little choice but to stand in the line, shoulder to shoulder, with men just as frightened, just as human, just as desperate to live. Now, as the dust settles, imagine the quiet after the storm. The clash of steel fades, the screams fall silent. What remains is smoke, broken weapons scattered across the earth, the smell of blood heavy in the air. Crows circle above, already waiting for their meal. For those who survived, there is no cheering, no sense of triumph. Victory means you still breathe, you still stand, but you carry new scars, inside and out. It is tempting to picture the Middle Ages as a world of shining knights and noble deeds, banners snapping in the wind and trumpet calls ringing in the air. But the truth, as we have seen, was harsher. The battlefield was not romance. It was not a poem or a song. It was mud, exhaustion, fear, and the constant knowledge that your life could end in an instant. Think back to those first moments when the armies faced one another across the field, that awful waiting, when your imagination filled the silence with horrors yet to come. The clashing of shields and the heavy breath of men forced into courage they did not feel. That was the beginning. And then came the storm, arrows blotting out the sun, spears meeting flesh, cavalry crashing through ranks. If you close your eyes, you can almost hear the sounds again, a drumbeat of chaos. What is striking is not only the violence itself, but the endurance it demanded. Soldiers stood for hours under weight of armor, weight of weapons, weight of expectation. The shield that protected you could also crush you. The spear that gave you reach might snap at the wrong moment. The helmet muffled not just your hearing, but your very sense of the world, trapping you inside a cage of iron and sweat. Yet men endured it, again and again, because they had to. For peasants, battle was not chosen. It was demanded. A lord called them, and they marched. For mercenaries, it was survival, the only trade they knew. For knights, it was a duty, and also a display of status. But for all, the field was the same. Once the charge began, wealth, rank, and courage meant little. All that mattered was whether you could keep standing, keep fighting, keep breathing. Now let us step back. Let us ask, what lingers from this story? What is left after the clash has ended? Perhaps it is the human truth beneath the armor, that war is rarely glorious, that most who fought did so unwillingly, without the choice we like to imagine in heroic tales. That in the end, courage is not absence of fear, but standing even when your whole body tells you to flee. And perhaps another truth remains, that our comfort today, our safety in soft beds, under quiet roofs, with food on our tables, is far removed from the harshness of that life. We may play games of knights and kingdoms. We may read stories of shining heroes. But the battlefield of the Middle Ages was no place for us. We would not last a day. This is not said to frighten, but to remind. History is not only about kings and crowns. It is about ordinary people who bore the weight of decisions made above them. The farmer turned soldier. The craftsman pressed into the line. The boy barely old enough to shave, gripping a spear for the first time. Their stories deserve to be remembered, quietly, gently, even as we drift to sleep. And so we close this journey. The battlefield fades, the noise softens, the soldiers lay down their arms, and you, listening now, can let the fear of their world slip away. You are safe here, far from the mud and the shouting. But if you found something in this long walk through the past, if you enjoyed hearing not just the grand tales, but the smaller human truths, then I invite you to stay with me, to subscribe, to follow along for the next story. Because there are always more hidden corners of history to explore, more nights to spend wandering quietly through the past, more boiling truths that remind us why we would not last a day in those times. Next time, we might step into another world, another age, another place where life was harder than we imagine. For now, rest easy, knowing that the battlefield is far behind us. Sleep well, traveler in history. Until we meet again.